Please be seated.
Yes, Mr. Kay.
Yes, Your Honours, matter I should raise before the court before Mr. Nice continues with his opening, and it's merely to put it on the record and give an explanation, because some people may have been concerned what happened in the adjournment, although for our part we're not. The accused passed a number of informal comments about the prosecution opening to Mr. Topuskovich of a very general nature, which we heard and which was translated for us, and not in the way of detailed instructions or anything like that. And the Amici obviously listened to what was being said by him. And we just raised this so that there is a clarification, if there is any communication by the accused to the Amici during the court session, to find out what the position is as your Honours would see it.
Well, the difficulty is this, that during the court session, or when the accused is going in and out of court, it's clearly disruptive. If there are conversations going on, it's better, if there are any conversations, that they take place out of court and not while he's going in and out. So if you wish to speak to him or he wishes to speak to you, then you must ask, and no doubt leave will be granted.
Thank you for that clarification, Your Honour.
We come to the elections of spring of 1990. In Croatia, the Croatian Democratic Union, known by its initials HDZ, won a plurality of votes and the majority of seats in the Croatian parliament, the Sabor, and elected the late Franjo Tuđman as its president. Can we just have a look at a plan? Sorry, thank you. We, of course, owe a duty to be even-handed in the presentation of this chronology, as indeed in the presentation of all the evidence in this case. And therefore, at this time, as we look at this plan, the first time we've looked at it, it shows, of course, Croatia surrounding Bosnia-Herzegovina. It shows the particular areas of interest to the Serbs, but just for the present purpose, it just shows a couple of points for identification purposes, really, because at this early stage, it's worth noting that Croat armed forces at this stage were already attacking the Serbs from time to time. In particular, they attacked some Serb civilians, notably in eastern Slavonia, which we can see in red, and indeed there were war crimes committed in the Gospic area, which is, I think, not shown specifically, but which is over to the west, now the subject of a high-profile trial itself in Croatia. We'll probably leave that map on the overhead projector, I think, for the time being, and move on. While the Croats of Croatia were moving towards a nationalist position and government, the attacks on Kosovo Albanians were continuing, and the delegates to their assembly in Kosovo passed what was an unofficial resolution declaring Kosovo an equal and independent entity within the Republic. Sorry, of course, this map doesn't show Kosovo. We all know where it is. In due course, for any who don't, maps will be on the overhead projection, making that clearer.
Yes, there's some interruption coming from one of the booths, which we can overhear. It may be that something could be done about it.
While that's being dealt with, Your Honour, I am aware that there is, of course, a new language being dealt with in this tribunal, and although probably it would have been desirable for me to move at the measured pace I'm adopting in any event for interpreters with whom I'm familiar, it's particularly appropriate with new interpreters that I don't go too fast.
Yes.
With that unofficial resolution passed, perhaps unsurprisingly, the Serbian Assembly reacted by dissolving the Kosovo Assembly, a further substantial attack on Kosovo's integrity. The accused Communist Party was changing, mutating into the new party that he was to lead, the Serbian Socialist Party, or SPS, coming into being on the 16th of July of 1990, the accused becoming its president, the party being and becoming one of, if not his main, lever of power. A word or so about that party. It remained the most powerful party in Serbia until the autumn of the year 2000. The accused was its president throughout, save for a period between May 91 and October 92, when the man Borislav Jovic, of whom we've already seen and heard a little, was president. This party controlled institutions on the Serb Republic and the Yugoslav federal level. The accused had de facto power at those levels through the party, regardless of which function he held, whether as president of Serbia, as he was from 90 to 97, or president of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia from 97 until 2000. Through his party, he could control the presidency of first the Socialist Republic, later the Federal Republic, and the Serbian assemblies. He controlled that which I've already described as the rump presidency, giving him control over the army, and the parliamentary majorities of the SPS gave him control over parliaments in both Serbia and Yugoslavia. The powers of patronage he exercised were enormous. Key government posts were filled by party members. Some of those names, and I shan't list all of them, who were appointed effectively by the party and thus by this accused, include Jovic, to whom we've referred, Kostic of the rump presidency, to whom we've referred, Nikola Shinovic, a deputy prime minister of the Federal Republic in due course and who will feature later, Vlajko Stojiljković, Serbian Minister of Internal Affairs, again, who will feature later, Milan Milutinovic, President of Serbia from 1997, who will feature in our later discussions, and Mikhail Kertis, the Federal Deputy Minister of the Interior and Serbian Minister without portfolio and Director of the Federal Customs Agency, a man of great significance in due course when we consider the way control of events was subject to control of money. It may not be easy to understand the real nature of a political party in the accused Serbia. It may be fair to describe it as the only real employer, certainly of people at a certain level, with the accused appointing people to high office, the party controlling the payroll. By this patronage, he exercised enormous power, which included control over media outlets, particularly Radio Television Serbia, RTS, and the publishing company Politica, because directors of these firms almost exclusively were members of the party, and it was individuals loyal to the accused that filled the top posts. Likewise, did he have control over the National Bank of Serbia, the National Bank of Yugoslavia, and that federal customs administration associated with the man Curtis. Almost all directors of major Serbian state companies, men who had enormous power and control, were members of the party, their jobs, their incomes, their homes, depending on that affiliation and on the patronage of the accused. In addition, and coming later, in 1995, the accused's wife, Mira Markovic, founded a party called the Yugoslav United Left, or JUL, a small party, but a place which would be home for those committed socialists and former communists for whom the nationalist tendency of the SPS was unacceptable. Small though the JUL was, it was a force to combine with the accused party, two parties within the one family, and between 1995 and 2000, the two parties joined forces in coalition governments on the federal and Republican level, bearing responsibility for all important decisions, including those in relation to state security and international policy. Thus, an outline of political control, and I return to the chronology. In September 1990, on the 7th of September indeed, many Kosovo-Albanian delegates of their assembly, as it had been, proclaimed a constitution for the Republic of Kosovo. On the 28th of September, the Republic of Serbia promulgated a new constitution which had wide-ranging effect. By Article 135, nullifying any obligations it owed to the rest of the country, and by Article 72, usurping two paramount federal functions, national defense and foreign relations. May be thought that this was a secessionist document in substance. Meanwhile, in November 1990, turning to Bosnia and Herzegovina, multi-party elections were called, and at the Republic level there, the voting was as follows. The SDA, the party of the Bosnian Muslims, came first with 86 seats. The SDS, the party of the Bosnian Serbs, second with 72, and the HDZ Croat party, 44 seats. Here we have three nationalistic parties, and they formed, for the time being, a coalition government, dividing up power in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Let us focus on the SDS, the party of the Bosnian Serbs. Its leader, Radovan Karadzic, its leadership including Momcilo Krajnik and Biljana Plavsic, co-perpetrators and, of course, awaiting trial here. The platform of that party was the unification of all Serbs within one state. The SDS, regarding the separation of Bosnia and Herzegovina from the Socialist Federal Republic as it still was, as a threat to the interests of the Serbs. Looking ahead, but only briefly, to 1993, in an interview, the woman member of those three, Biljana Plavsic, said the following, and I quote, "In order not to have any fear as to what will happen, I would prefer us to cleanse eastern Bosnia from the Muslims. They have introduced the term ethnic cleansing to denote a perfectly natural phenomenon and qualified it as a war crime." She went on, "Muslims originate from the Serbs, but it is spoiled Serbian genetic material which has converted to Islam, and then naturally, from generation to generation, the gene has condensed. It has deteriorated further. Thus, when looking at the SDS, the views of one of its leaders. Meanwhile, in Serbia, on the 9th of December 1990, this accused was elected again President of Serbia, but now not by internal mechanisms, but by a popular mandate, giving him an authority greater than any of his colleagues, or it may be thought those whose election was indirect. Staying with the map and looking at the various areas, helpfully colored yellow, green, blue, and red, on the 21st of December, Croatian Serbs in Knin announced the creation of a Serbian autonomous district and declared their independence from Croatia. Back in Kosovo, as moves for independence elsewhere in the Federation of Yugoslavia were gathering pace, in Kosovo, suppression was continuing. Throughout late 1990 and 1991, thousands of Kosovo Albanian doctors, teachers, professors, workers, police, civil servants were dismissed from their job simply on account of their being Kosovo Albanians. The local court was abolished, many judges were removed, and violence against Kosovo Albanians increased. Pause to ask ourselves this, a question of curious importance, as we will later see. Who lived in Kosovo? How many? Only estimates are available for the population of Kosovo in 1991 because the Kosovo Albanians boycotted the census that was administered that year. General estimates are that the population during the time period relevant to this indictment was between 1,800,000 and 2,100,000. And of that number, approximately 85 or 90% were Kosovo Albanians, 5 to 10% Serbs, and some other smaller groups. The significance of those figures? Significant in themselves in light of what was to happen to those people. Particularly significant when we see later, much later, how this accused was to attempt to misrepresent the very strong balance of the population in favor of the Kosovo Albanians. On the 22nd of January 1991, the accused and President Momir Bulatovic of neighboring Montenegro, in a joint press release, proclaimed to the world that existing Yugoslav borders, quote, have never been the boundaries within which individual Yugoslav nations live, drawing a distinction between state and nation. And on the 5th of February of 1991, Serbia established ministries of its government, as proposed by the accused, including a ministry specifically to have links with Serbs outside Serbia. And it was this ministry that assisted the SDS, the party of the Serbs in Bosnia, to establish that Serb Republic, to which we will be turning later. On the 23rd of February of 1991, now I'm not sure that is exactly that date, in February 1991, the accused visited the head office of that party to be greeted by Karadzic, Krajnik, and Plavšić. In all their presences, Karadzic told the journalists present this: "We do not see that this should be discussed. Serbs living exclusively in a joint state, just as it is natural that rain falls, it is quite natural for Serbs to live in the same state." The party's expression of purpose was clear. But it wasn't all plain sailing for the accused. In March of 1991, demonstrations against him, this time in respect of his control of the media, soon to become the most serious challenge to his regime, demonstrations that were violently suppressed by both the police and the army. I will not trouble you with footage of these demonstrations, but we will see later the degree to which this accused was prepared to use force on those of his own who took against him. But with these demonstrations, the accused was embattled. And it's interesting to observe that Karadzic of the Bosnian Serbs came to his rescue to the extent of, at any event, threatening violence with these words: "If demonstrations are a weapon," he said, "it has to be said that we have so much pressure from Serbs in Bosnia-Herzegovina that 1 million of them are ready to go to Belgrade and demonstrate." So the accused threatened at home could turn for help to Serbs abroad. A symbiotic relationship. Serbs abroad were to seek and have assistance from the accused, at any event, for as long as he could give it. So Yugoslavia reached a deep crisis with the events I have described in summary, leading to the accused famously to declare that Yugoslavia was finished. Deadlock in the presidency led to the following. The very representatives on the presidency, those from Serbia, Montenegro, Vojvodina, and Kosovo, who may have been under the control of the accused, resigned, subsequently to rejoin. Why did they resign? The evidence may satisfy the tribunal in due course that their resignation was part of a complicated attempt at a coup, in the course of which General Kajevich was to take over with the army. The accused was to play his part, which he did, by saying the things he said, and, for example, at a secret meeting, telling local government leaders that Serbia was de facto at war, and saying this: "If we don't know how to work and run the economy well, we surely know how to fight well," saying it's always the powerful, never the weak, who dictate frontiers, and announcing on television that he was organizing police reservists to prevent rebellions in Kosovo and elsewhere. He stated Serbia would no longer be bound by decisions of the federal presidency, control its rump, though he did. That position, or those positions of the accused, have of course been stated on many occasions, namely that the borders of the Yugoslav states were irrelevant and merely administrative and would have to be changed before any republic could become independent. So far as the accused was concerned, borders were only borders if they were for people. Only people could become independent. But of course, people could not take their land with them, which meant, in the logic of these arguments, that people would be forced off their lands to allow people to have the borders that they wanted. But back to the coup, if coup it was. If the army was to take over, then perhaps it lost its nerve and failed. And so Jovic and the others returned to the presidency. He, of course, that is the accused, continued to control the members of the presidency, some of them being changed at about this time further to fit in with his own desires. There was a replacement, I needn't trouble you with the names for the time being, in respect of Kosovo, that replacement being organized not by the Kosovo Assembly, but by the Serbian Assembly. Kostic came to represent Montenegro, Yugoslav Kostic came to represent Vojvodina, and Borisav Jovic stayed as the representative of Serbia, so that the accused controlled 4 of the 8 votes on the presidency and could paralyze the Yugoslav government at will. Of those 4, the prosecution's case is that it was Jovic and Kostic who were his primary agents, through whom he directed actions of the Serbian bloc, matters covered in the memoirs of one of them and subject of evidence we will lead. On the 29th of March of 1991, again famously, the accused met President Franjo Tudjman in Karađorđevo to discuss the partition of Bosnia and Herzegovina between Serbia and Croatia. The accused promised Croatia the territory of what was described as the 1939 Banovina. I'll come to that briefly when introducing the Croatian indictment. The agreement left little, very little, for the Muslims. It was to be, in the vernacular, a carving up of another territory. In March 1991, the conflict intensified. Serb police forces attempted to consolidate power over areas with significant Serb populations, and Serb police, headed by Milan Martic, a co-perpetrator in one of these indictments, took control of a police station in Pakrac, which is in western Slavonia. If you just put the map back on very briefly to remind. Thank you. Western Slavonia, shown on the map. At Plitvice, in the Krajina, towards the west, famous, beautiful lakes, the Serbs attacked a bus carrying Croatian policemen. Another battle erupted. The JNA army deployed troops, issuing an ultimatum to the Croatian police to withdraw from Plitvice. And the consequence of that, something to be repeated on other occasions, was to leave the Serb attackers in the area with the spoils that they had achieved by the time of the intervention of the army. By March of 1991, another body had been formed, It was called the Supreme Command Staff. And it gradually assumed command authority over the army. The picture we see here is of Agic, the JNA Chief of Staff, on the left, and Kajevich on the right. The title of the photograph, with its date, which is a little hard to see, but it's 1991, and I think it's the 12th of March, is Meeting of the Supreme Command. Now, the Supreme Command was something that should only have existed in wartime, but it was set up now. And later, Kajevich told Stipe Mesic, whose present role is well known, that the accused had wanted him to found the Supreme Command Staff, and that Kajevich had cooperated with him since the remaining Serbian leadership, as he said, reflecting a use of the word Četnik that is not favorable, the rest of the Serb leadership were even greater Četniks than he. Well, that view, that the others were worse, was that a view that some others, even international diplomats, may in due course or at the time have allowed themselves to think. And if they and all of them thought it, were they ultimately to be proved wrong? On the 15th of May, Serbian delegates blocked the election of Stipe Mesic to president of the presidency, leaving Yugoslavia without a head of state. And at that same time, a little later, 29th of May, the accused brought Karadzic, whose party may be seen as an offshoot of the Croat party with the same initials, into the plan. We will play now with the assistance of the booth, a tape of an intercept. It's between the accused and Karadzic. It discusses getting arms for part of Bosnia. Before we play it, can I forecast what you will be hearing? The accused tells Karadzic to call the Army General Uzelak, commander of the Banja Luka Corps, and a man in charge of units in Western Slavonia, to arrange a meeting with him on the highest level. About the armament of local Serb populations, the accused says this: all men you give, you have to stay and protect houses and territory, and block the HDZ centers, will be armed and give everything they need. We'll transport that by helicopter. When Karadzic asks whether they could get weapons for territorial defense, the accused answered, it's not a problem. If we could hear the tape, please.
Ide to, nego ovo mi recite, možemo li istu stvar udesiti da mi date oružje teritorijalne odbrane u Šipovu i u Mrkonjiću?
A to je sitnica.
Pa dobro, nek mi naoružaju tamo, evo mi smo spremni 170 u Mrkonjiću i 150 u...
Then let's do it. We're ready. There are 170 people in Mrkonjić and 150 in Šipovo who are ready to go to Kupres.
Is Uzelac authorized for that too?
No, that is yes. I think he is, yes.
Well, then tell him we can't discuss every detail like this.
Okay. Then these 150 and 170 men will go to Kupres, and we already have 750 men there at Kupres.
So it's important for us that the JNA battalion be at Kupres and that everything goes well.
I'm not sure whether that reflected entirely my forecast, but this is one of a number of intercepts now available. and the intercept that I had in mind reflects the content that I said, and reveals the contribution to arms for Karadzic by this accused. I move on. Elsewhere, the world was not entirely asleep, however much it might later have been criticized for lack of awareness. As early as the 20th of May of 1991, the United States Congress announced entry into force of the Nichols Amendment, banning economic assistance to Yugoslavia due to repression in Kosovo. The accused was to learn that playing the nationalist tune came with a price. But this was only the beginning of the price or the cost. Huge costs in money, but of course significantly in lives lost and ruined, was to lie ahead. August the 1st, 1991, brings us to the start of the period covered by the indictment, first in time, the Croatia indictment. Let us take stock. A great deal has, of course, been written about this man. But this trial starts with a blank sheet of paper and writes on it only that which can be spelled out by evidence. The prosecution should perhaps express some forecast of what that evidence will reveal in general terms, consistent with what the prosecutor has already explained to you. A clever and ambitious man will be revealed, not a racist in the sense of someone determined to live only with fellow Serbs, not an idealist, someone concerned more, if not exclusively, with the maintenance of personal power. A man who we must now contrast, the figure we see here and in the earlier hearings, who speaks of defending his people, of the unfair wars against the Serbs, casting himself as victim, with the person who could bring 1 million people to their feet, waiting for just a few minutes of his time. A complex man. A man who would leave no traces if he could avoid them, or who indeed destroyed traces of his control. A man who, in order to do that, avoided large meetings where those attending could always find support for disagreement or dissension in others, and a man who perhaps, as a result, preferred one-to-one encounters, personal control, where those with him could not be sure of the loyalty or the disloyalty of others. A man who was prepared to use different objectives to stimulate different people, all Serbs in one state, anti-capitalism, or, when dealing with the international community, the preservation of the integrity of the former Yugoslavia as appropriate summaries of his position. A man who, it may be thought, counted on the short-term memories of observers and who was able later to play the peacemaker. A man, it may be, who simply regards those as fools, who cannot see how easy it is to say one thing and to do another. Looking at the case overall, the prosecution's case is that the overall transaction that links the three indictments together is to be found in a transaction that from first to last has the accused being concerned by forcible removal of non-Serbs from areas of the former Yugoslavia to have and to control a centralized Serbian state. To do so by gaining from Croatia and Bosnia or retaining in Kosovo territory that fell within his plan. In language created by the facts of this case, he did that by ethnic cleansing. May I indulge myself once only in this opening to this extent? Is ethnic cleansing a phrase that should, if there is man with ingenuity to do it, be abandoned and replaced by words that better describe the real horror of what is contained within those two words, lest the understatement implicit in the word cleansing should ever permit any offender to feel free to do that which he or she would not do if these acts were correctly described. Not having that ingenuity myself, I must stick to the phrase that these facts created. Looking at the accused and in the vernacular, from first to last, he wanted as much as he could get, as we will reveal, as much as he could get away with and as much as he could keep, providing that the price was not too high in territory or power. A flexible man who did not waste time with dreams, and this may have marked him off from some of those with whom he was concerned, he pursuing a personal, they an idealistic agenda. At the outset, he thought he could have it all, perhaps, a new Yugoslavia, himself a second Tito. That impossible, the central Serbian state to be carved out of Croatia and Bosnia, all the while keeping Kosovo in an iron grip. This all to be effected by the forcible removal of non-Serbs whenever and wherever they posed a challenge, possibly simply to satisfy the hatreds of those who implemented his will. As we look at the three indictments that make this trial, and in due course, the Chamber may be satisfied that in Croatia and in Bosnia, he was involved in war that he could afford to win, but didn't. Kosovo was something he could never afford to lose, but he did. The accused carried out his aim or objective of control and domination by Serbs over territory with different co-perpetrators who were all part of a common plan. The plan was achieved through various means or methods, many of the methods used involving the commission of crimes under the statute of this tribunal. This case providing a clear example of how state machinery may be used for pursuing criminal objectives. The evidence will show that the accused had a central role in different, although closely related, joint criminal enterprises, each involving the commission of the various crimes under the statute. In relation to activities of the accused in different locations, the accused used the structure of the Federal Republic and of Serbia to accomplish the scheme agreed with others. The shared criminal intent on all occasions, including the commission of the gravest crimes against the non-Serb population in an effort to gain or retain control over territory, ensuring Serb domination. The systematic and organized way in which the attacks against the non-Serb civilian population was carried out reveal carefully designed schemes and strategies within the overall plan. He used his control and influence over elements of the army, first the JNA, later known as the VJ, over the MUP that I've already described, over individual politicians, over the political and military leadership of the Republic of Srpska, to be declared in due course in Bosnia, and in all cases using many resources at his disposal to ensure the efficient execution of schemes designed to achieve the overall plan. He had a fundamental role in the planning, organization, financing, support, and direction of the execution of the plans. He was thus an essential participant in the criminal enterprises, to the extent that without him it is hard to conceive of any of them. The Croatian indictment, which I must summarize for its potential significance in the immediately forthcoming part of the case concerning Kosovo, but which I must obviously deal with at sufficient detail for the accused, who may not have taken the opportunity of reading the materials provided to him, to understand what he faces. Croatia, briefly, having been a medieval state on the front lines of the fighting of the Ottoman Empire, became part of Yugoslavia in 1918, negotiated autonomy in 1939, at that stage including within its territory that was later to be part of Bosnia, called the Banovina, part of northern or northwestern Bosnia. In World War II, Croatia was divided between Tito's partisans and the fascist Ustashi. After the war, became a republic of the new socialist Yugoslavia. The indictment in this case is public, as they all are, and it would be inappropriate for me to expand on the allegations in great detail. Sufficient to say this: included in the Croatian indictment are crimes against humanity, such as persecution, murder, deportation, which offenses have to be committed as part of a widespread or systematic attack against the civilian population. That's all contrary to Article 5 of the statute. The indictment includes grave breaches of the Geneva Convention of 1949, such offenses as killing and torture. For these offenses, the victims have to be persons protected under those conventions. There having to be a connection with an international armed conflict. That's Article 2 of our statute. Third, there are offenses charged as violations of the laws and customs of war, such as murder, wanton destruction, and so on, contrary to Article 3 of our statute. This indictment, not being about matters of history, is not about justification for Croatia's secession from Yugoslavia or the merits of the Croat Serbs' revolt. It's not about Milosevic's backing the Croatian Serb cause. It is only concerned with crimes and his individual responsibility for them. A responsibility he bears by his support for very specific acts and particular people and the things that they did. In the spring of 1990, thus, Croatia left the communist fold with its new government under Franjo Tudjman. The map again. Serbs from rural areas launched a rebellion in August 1990 in the area called the Krajina, green. For those unfamiliar with it, there's always the potential confusion because there's another Krajina to be referred to across the border, south and east in Bosnia. We are concerned here with the Croat Krajina. In that Krajina lived about half of the total number of Serbs that lived in Croatia. The rest of the Serbs lived peacefully, substantially throughout the war, in other parts of Croatia. The rebellion of those Serbs would have detached about a third of Croatia from the rest of its territory, and did so, as we will discover, for a full year, despite the continuation of the federal Yugoslavia. Those authorities did nothing to help and everything to worsen the situation. And indeed, although not charged for that period, ethnic cleansing took place, with many Croats fleeing in the face of initial attacks. But on the 25th of June 1991, Croatia itself declared independence. The Krajina Serbs declared their own separation from Croatia and their annexation to Serbia. They also declared union with that other Krajina in Bosnia to which I've referred. The Krajina Serbs were led by a duo of former communists turned nationalists, leaders of the Serbian Democratic SDS party. First, their president, Milan Babic, and second, their police chief, Milan Martic, both co-perpetrators. Under the direction and the direct involvement of the Serbian MUP, in particular of the man Jovica Stanisic, shown here, and another man, Franki Simatovic, also shown, a local territorial defense and the Martic police force was set up. Janisic at the time was Chief of State Security for the Republic of Srpska as of March 1991. At the same time, in eastern Slavonia, blue, local Serbs also declared their separation from Croatia, declaring themselves to be part of the Socialist Federation. Their leader, Goran Hadžić, and under the direction of the Serbian MUP, with its official Radovan Stojicic and a man, Željko Raznatovic, they established territorial defense with police units. The second name is, of course, the real name of someone far better known, the late Arkan. Let us not forget Western Slavonia, where, sorry if I said blue, I meant red last time, but never mind. We dealt with red, now go to blue. Western Slavonia, where the Yugoslav army and the paramilitaries of a man called Vojislav Šešelj, president of a radical party which openly espoused a particular creed, were active. The creed openly espoused by the man Šešelj went by the title of Greater Serbia. It's a phrase that is bound to be heard in this court. We will not ourselves encourage its excessive use for fear that a shorthand may lead to a brevity of thinking. We don't particularly associate it as a title with the approach of the accused, whose purposes we have already separately described. That he might rely on the support of people who had perhaps extreme nationalist views going by particular titles is, again, for reasons already given, not surprising. War followed, and with it the crimes. The accused, in order to play his part in what was to develop in Croatia between the Croatian Serbs in the areas described and others, had the following at his disposal: the army, the territorial defense units of the Krajina and of Slavonia, Martić's police. He also had the territorial defense of Serbia, his own to command, and of Montenegro. He had the Serbian Interior Ministry, his own by law to control, and, as we will discover, a broad array of paramilitaries tied in one way or another to the units just cited. All those units on this territory committed a widespread criminal campaign with extermination or murder of hundreds of Croats and non-Serbs in the various places listed in the indictment, including Vukovar and Dubrovnik. The prolonged and routine imprisonment and confinement of thousands of Croats and other non-Serbs in detention facilities in Croatia and elsewhere, Montenegro, Serbia, Bosnia-Herzegovina. Torture, beatings, and killings of Croats in those detention centers. Forced labor of Croat and non-Serb civilians detained and sometimes not detained. Sexual assaults of Croat and non-Serbs. Also perpetrating unlawful attacks on Dubrovnik and undefended Croat villages throughout the territories that we have specified in the indictment. The beating and robbing of Croat and other non-Serb civilians. The torture and beatings of Croat and other non-Serb civilians during and after their arrest. In addition, the deportation or forcible transfer of at least 170,000 Croat and other non-Serb civilians from the territories in which they had an interest, including the deportation to Serbia itself of at least 5,000 inhabitants from Ilok, 20,000 from Vukovar, and the forcible transfer to locations within Croatia of 2,500 inhabitants from Erdut, which I think we were able to see on the map, but we needn't put it up again. Finally, there was the destruction of homes, public, private property, cultural institutions, historic monuments, sacred sites of Croat and other non-Serb populations in Dubrovnik and elsewhere. And a pattern for these attacks will be found in the evidence. For example, surrounding of villages by Serb forces, often the JNA, the army. Entering of forces, often the territorial defense, the police or paramilitaries. Killing of inhabitants, sometimes a few, sometimes many, sometimes all. Expulsion of survivors, if any. Looting of homes, destruction of villages by fire or explosives. As I say, we must use the word ethnic cleansing. It happened over and over again, done by different units in different places, so that it became the rule, not the exception. It was something that was in due course to happen in neighboring Bosnia, and then later still in Kosovo. The evidence shows that the forces I've cited operated together towards a single goal at the direction of this accused. Yes. And the objective of all the parties matched that of the Serbian Bosnian leader Radovan Karadzic, treating the war in Croatia as an integral part of the overall Serbian conflict, with a single goal responsive to a single master. How did the accused manage those Krajina and Slavonian Serbs whose territories we've looked at on the map? Here's a report of one of their meetings early in May 1991, and it's on the video, although of course it's in translation. The original documents I have available, of course. I'll just give you a minute, I'll try and find my own version. It's a little hard to read on the document we have there. You can see that this is a meeting of the regional SDS party at the top. The meeting is opened, and in the second paragraph, the meeting is recorded in this way. The speaker says, "As for talks with Milosevic, he appeared sufficiently informed of the situation in the Socialist Republic of Croatia, but said he was angry with the Krajina for making decisions without consulting him, and suggested that if we decide to participate in the referendum of the 12th of May, the ballot has to read in favor of remaining in Yugoslavia, not Serbia. The reason is that there is no legal or international support, and we shouldn't participate in the referendum on the 19th of May because it would mean an internationally recognized Croatia. America would even agree to military intervention, but not civil war, provided that Ante Markovic stays. At the same time, Serbia will exert pressure on Croatia not to hold a referendum on the 19th of May and instead organize a Yugoslavian referendum. Further, according to Milosevic, Mesic will not take up the post of president on the 15th of May because this means that Croats would be holding 4 key positions in the SFRI, the Federal Socialist Republic. Zaskula briefed on the talks with Slobo and said his main demand is that we do not get involved in clashes with the Ministry of Interior anymore, but let them clash with the army, which can deal with the NDH, that's the reference back to the wartime fascist state. Let them deal with the NDH without any problems. There are 3 international options for Yugoslavia, which will be announced on the 10th of May. At the same time, he accepts faster and better cooperation. Knin remains the basis for all further activities. Milosevic also said the talks with the leadership should continue, for in this way we at least have a direct insight into their thinking. So, he was angry that the Krajina had acted without consulting him. They were to boycott the referendum and hold their own. Using the JNA, he said, could deal effectively with Croatia. That's what NDH means in this circumstance. And it may be thought that the point was, amongst others, keep Serbia out of it technically, do everything within the framework technically of Yugoslavia, from the presidency of which Mesic would be barred. Be sure to carry on consulting with him in the future, as the evidence showed that they did. Chamber may be satisfied in due course from evidence and also from the memoirs of the man Jovic that the defendant, the accused, described as Slobo, had two ideas. In a quotation in the memoirs, Jovic said this: Slobo had two ideas. First, that the amputation of Croatia be effected in such a way that, he named two particular municipalities, Lika, Banija, and Kordun, which have created their own community, remain with us, whereby the people there later declare in a referendum whether they want to stay or go. And second, that the members of the Socialist Federal Republic presidency from Slovenia and Croatia be excluded from the voting on the decision because they do not represent the part of Yugoslavia that is adopting this decision. At about this time, the accused brought the leader of the Bosnian Serbs, Karadzic, into the plan. The tape, that is the intercept tape to which I've referred, deals with that, and I'm not going to replay it or attempt, if I found the wrong passage before, to find the correct passage now. A meeting was scheduled for the 5th of July of 1991, according to Jovic in his diary, with General Kajevic. The demand being made of the general at that time was this: the main forces of the JNA must be concentrated on a line running from, and then he gives the geographical locations, Karlovac to Plitvice in the west, Baranja, Osijek, and Vinkovci to the Sava in the east, and along the Neretva in the south. In this way, it will cover all the territory where Serbs live until the situation is fully resolved, until a free expression of popular will in a referendum. This approach was accepted, it appears, by the general. We don't have all those places marked on a map, but running up and across, down, it would take in the largest conceivable area of those Serbs living other than in Serbia. It would be without regard, it may be thought, to the interests of the many other people living within that area. Milosevic worked very closely with co-participants in the joint criminal enterprise from the Bosnian Serb leadership in forming the strategy for obtaining control of those territories. In addition to periodic face-to-face visits with the Bosnian Serb leaders, the accused and his associates maintained regular, frequent, and sometimes daily telephone contact with them. His authority with the Bosnian Serb leadership is evident in a deferential tone employed by Bosnian Serbs in Karadzic's plea for daily contact, and even in the occasional use of the term boss when mentioned. And I think we do have a tape which is revealing of Karadzic and Milosevic at this time. Can we play that?
We go, and if they want to fight, we're here, and they can go to hell. We're here for whoever wants to fight, and we're stronger. And if they want to live in peace, we're here. No one will be either better or worse off than we are. Milosevic. Whoever wants to follow Alia and fight against us can do so. They will lose, and it will be a pleasure for us. But if they want to be honest and decent towards us, we will behave towards them as we do towards ourselves.
Expressions of view that could hardly be clearer. And this was the man controlling the army whose services would be available to Croatia as it became independent. No, I beg your pardon, not available to Croatia, to the Serbs in Croatia, as Croatia became independent. But it's clear from what we've heard that things began as a single plan, the whole operation remaining closely monitored by, under the control of this accused. In August of 1991, the siege of Vukovar, to which I made very brief reference at the very beginning. The JNA undertook operations against towns in eastern Slavonia, resulting in their occupation by JNA and other Serb forces. The Croat and other non-Serb populations in these areas was forcibly expelled. By late August, the JNA laid siege to the city of Vukovar, and by mid-October, all other predominantly Croat towns in eastern Slavonia had been taken by Serb forces, except for Vukovar, which was itself a mixed Croat-Serb city. Non-Serbs there were subject to brutal occupation regime consisting of persecution, murder, torture, and other acts of violence. Almost all of the non-Serb population was either killed or forced from the occupied areas. Yes, there were Croat forces responsible for provocative acts and criminal acts, but nothing like on the same scale. These acts by Croats are being examined by the Office of the Prosecutor of this tribunal. But of course, reprisals, if that is to any extent what they were, are not justified so as to cover the various crimes committed by the Serb forces. The siege of Vukovar continued until the 18th of November 1991, when the city fell to Serb forces. During that 3-month siege, the city was almost totally destroyed by JNA shelling and by hundreds of people were killed. When the JNA and Serb forces occupied the city, hundreds more Croats were killed by Serb troops, the non-Serb population of the city being expelled within days of its fall under Serb control. We now, I think, have a video, and I think the first part of it will show us something of the fall of Vukovar, with its non-Serb inhabitants being transferred. There's an old gentleman shown in it. He was shot dead a few minutes after this video was filmed. And we will see a sequence at a warehouse in Vukovar where civilians were gathered in the afternoon of the 20th of November, taken away in an organized military action. And I think on the first bit of the video we will see that while they were taken into buses and military trucks, Arkan and also Goran Hadžić and other JNA officials were there as well. Can we play that video, please? This is the old gentleman who was soon to be shot. Not particularly old, indeed, but elderly. But his shooting is not shown. This footage has obviously been slowed down for its own purposes by the original makers of it, not our creation, but nevertheless depictive in a dramatic way of these awful events. And there you saw Arkan. There he is. And there are some nuns being moved. As I explained right at the beginning of my address, victims from the JNA barracks were taken to the Ovchara farm, that is victims who'd been gathered from the hospital, which is about 5 kilometers south of Vukovar. And there, having been beaten and tortured, all bar a few, were taken, shot, and buried in a mass grave. Between the 18th and 20th of November of 1991, after termination of military operations in and around Vukovar, the JNA deported thousands of Croat and other non-Serb inhabitants into the territory of the Republic of Serbia. Following a request of Goran Hadžić to retain those non-Serbs suspected of participation in the military operations, the JNA transported a large number of the inhabitants of Vukovar to detention facilities in Dalj nearby on about the 20th of November, where Serb territorial defense members selected those suspected of participating in the defense of Vukovar, interrogated, beat, tortured, and in the case of at least 34 of them, summarily executed them. Interestingly, if one has in mind, without reviewing the map, which shows how the extremities of Croatia are so far removed one from the other, on the very day of the fall of Vukovar, a witness from whom you'll hear heard about the events on the military radio, showing, of course, I beg your pardon, the witness, I should say, is at the opposite end of Croatia, the other side, nearer the coast. He heard about it on the radio. Yet another, not trivial, but slight reflection of the fact that this was all acting together, known to one another, pursuit of a common plan. And as I suppose a little postscript to Vukovar, bearing in mind the people that were taken from the hospital, one of the civilians detained in Serbia following all these events was the head of that hospital. The accused never gave any explanation for his crimes, but maybe his real attitude can be assessed from what he did. One of those responsible was a man, Shliven Shanin. He continued to serve in the Yugoslav army and in the VJ under the supreme command of this accused. He was active until certainly late last year. Another commander at Vukovar, Mile Mrksić, became military commander in the Krajina in May of 1995, 3 years after the crimes in Vukovar. The third senior JNA commander at the Vukovar scene, General Andrija Bjorkovic, was decorated the day after Vukovar fell. The local Serb boss, Goran Hadžić, the man whose very men took charge of those prisoners at the Ovčara farm where so many were killed, was chosen by this accused to replace the Krajina president soon afterwards, on the 22nd of February of 1992. And evidence will show that the accused government worked closely with that man implicated in the Vukovar event, and that indeed the accused ordered support for him. Evidence will come evidence will come consistent with what is contained in the diary of the Secretary of the Ministry of Defense for Serbia, Simovic. And I read you a quote. It's on the overhead projector. It sets out how, at that time, Simovic, the Ministry of Defense for Serbia, and the accused met, just the two of them, being in daily touch over the special line, but at that moment they had to arrange things without any middleman. Coming back to his office, Simovic shortly said, "Those that are patient shall be saved," and then he went on listing things that had to be done urgently. All the photographs and videotapes we had that were showing genocide of the Serb people in Krajinas should be handed over to the Ministry of Information, who were to prepare books and documents for The Hague. That's not for here, that's for one of the meetings here. Goran Hadžić was to be given all possible assistance in connection with the establishment of governmental institutions in the Serb province. And we recruited quite a number of colonels, either already retired or about to be retired, and dispatched them there to organize territorial defense. Ministry of Defense set up task groups led by generals to receive people that came every day for instructions on and assistance for the Serb Krajinas. We had to find the people and prepare a speech for the Prime Minister, Goran Hadžić, as his address and appeal to the people of Serbia to help the Serb people in the Serb Krajina. You cannot have much closer co-participation than to have Serbia writing letters nominally to come from Hadžić, requesting the support of Serbia to be given to Hadžić. On the 22nd of January, following an attack of the Croatian army on the Maslenica bridge, Hadžić proclaimed total mobilization for the RSK, declaring a state of war and threatening to shell Zagreb. Here, a picture of Hadžić with a face on the left that is already familiar. Was this the Krajina Serbs' war plan in a nutshell? Indiscriminate attacks on civilian targets, because this certainly was a threat that was carried out in 1995. So far as the financing of the Krajina's army is concerned, the accused and the army's general staff were heavily involved. According to minutes of talks of Krajina representatives, including Hadzic and Chief of Police Martic, with the accused and some others, on the 12th of November 1992, the mode of financing the Krajina army and its police was agreed. It was agreed that the army and police needed to be financed as before through Serbia's Ministry of Defense. It was agreed that there should be the maintenance of equipment and military staff through the VJ. It was agreed that the Krajina Ministry of Defense should request the Serbian Ministry of Defense for 200 billion dinars until the end of November 92 and 150 billion dinars until the 5th of December 92, with further funding into the year 1993. The Krajina's army was totally dependent on financial assistance from the Republic of Serbia. The accused was responsible for and directed the provision of that assistance. Hadzic himself said in an interview in July 93 of the accused that the accused consulted him in all matters related to the RSK. He referred to his good relationship with the accused and praised him as the greatest Serbian politician. I'm about to change topics.
Let it be a convenient moment. We'll adjourn now until 2:30.
All rise. Veuillez vous lever.